Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being with us here today. So, today we have with us Priyanka Sami. She is a feminist and Dalit activist working closely with rights based organizations and campaigns. And we have Achal Sijapati, who is the program associate for Feminist Dalit Organization. Thank you for joining us. And so, first, I would like to introduce you to our movement, Fridays for Future. Uh, we're a highly decentralized movement. We're trying to be or trying to understand the intersectionality of the climate crisis. We're interested in, of course, making people aware of the issues related to the climate crisis, interested in climate education, and how climate change disproportionately impacts certain sections of our society. So, hi everyone. Uh, Another reminder for people who have recently joined us, we have an interpreter with us here today, Prityaksha Huja. You can select Hindi if you wish to in the interpretation box. It's at the bottom. You can see a globe there. You can select that. All right. So if anyone has any comments, they can drop it in the chat box. And if anyone has any questions, our speakers will take those up towards the end. All right. So I would like to ask my first question to Priyanka and Achal. So, first things first, what does gender justice look like to Dalit women? And how does the climate crisis disproportionately affect Dalit women? So maybe Priyanka can go first and then Achal. This would lay the stone for all our further conversations today.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Salam and Jai Bhim. I would like to thank Fridays for Future and NCDHR for inviting me to join this very critical discussion. I'm delighted to be here with you today. To answer your question and set the context, I would like to state that women are not a homogeneous or monolithical group and are differentially impacted by various social forces. I think it's important to set the stage that it's critical to examine how gender interacts with other social identities and power structures such as caste, patriarchy, religion, etc., to shape experiences and outcomes. Some groups, of course, sort of derive privilege and power from it, while others face multiple forms of marginalization, resulting in stark socio-cultural, economic, and political inequalities. These power equations form the very basis of these hegemonic narratives that define socially accepted norms and roles. Now, the social location of Dalit women being at the bottommost or the lowest rung of the class, caste, and gender hierarchies results in them facing multiple forms of marginalization and discrimination, and I think most importantly, targeted violence. So, therefore, in India at least, despite 70 years of constitutional safeguards and equality before law, Dalit women remain at the bottom of the social ladder and face everyday discrimination. For instance, rape is used as a tool against the Dalit community to crush dissent and maintain caste based hierarchies and power relations. The latest NCRB data, which is the government data, says a minimum of 10 Dalit women are raped every day. So, despite this sort of enduring legacy of testimony by Dalit women, there's a complete normalization of sexual violence against them. Even if you look at the Me Too movement, for instance, Dalit women's struggles really remained in the periphery. Nobody was talking about Dalit women. So, therefore, I think it's important this sort of intersectionality and the intersecting discrimination that happens needs to be sort of deconstructed in order to comprehensively address these fractured narratives on inequality. So therefore, when we're looking at policies for women, especially women from marginalized communities, it is absolutely critical to prioritize gender responsive planning, budgeting, and implementation through the lens of intersectionality. In India, at least, when we look at government policies and budgets, it reveals there are wide gaps between policies and the lived realities of Dalit women. There are measures in place, but there are huge problems in the domain of implementation. And there are very limited policies as well addressing their needs. And if you look at climate policies as well, gender and caste is often, it's sort of an ignored variable in climate governance policies, such as access to land, resources, and water. There is no aspect of intersectionality whatsoever, even though the impact on the poor, especially Dalit women, is really stark. If you look at Dalit women in India, they continue to struggle for land rights. And if you see how the implementation of land reforms happened, Dalit women, actually the whole community, the entire Dalit community's claim as traditional tillers of land was never recognized. And land alienation really is at the root of caste violence. Everything that happens in villages, in agricultural lands, is so integrally related to caste. And if you look at the statistics in India, like about 73% of rural women are engaged in agriculture, but only 13% of land, but they only own about 13% of land. So, therefore, women on the whole struggle to be visible as farmers. And of course, the struggle is common but intensifies along the intersections of caste, class, and gender. So I'll give it over to my colleague, and we could sort of discuss this further.
So yeah, can I proceed?
Yes, Achal. Please go ahead.
So yeah, before proceeding, I like to take a moment to thank Friday for Future and CDHR team for giving me this opportunity to speak among such inspiring people. So yeah, answering my question, talking about Dalit women in Nepal. They suffer not only from caste-induced vulnerabilities, but also from gender and class hierarchy, bearing the brunt of discrimination and violence they are experienced with each identity. Dalit women compared to Dalit men have less access to basic resources, social rights, along with less political participation and empowerment. And this makes Dalit women more vulnerable to environmental injustices. In a country where 65% of population completely depends on agriculture, Dalit women are often the primary force in contributing to this sector because during drought or floods, Dalit men are driven to migrate elsewhere for economic opportunities such as tourism and construction work, leaving Dalit women behind who are then more vulnerable to sexual harassment and unable to become self sufficient as they are prohibited for owning their land. Hence, it makes them difficult to cope up with both physical and emotional pressure, and they fail to take care of children and the elderly one who are also left behind. And similarly, the climate change has adversely affected the overall water availability in Nepal. Nepal was one of the richest country in water resources, and everyone could have an easy access to it. But now water has become a scarce resource and is available to only those who are ready to pay for it. And this has increased the vulnerability of Dalit women and girls as they have been, as they as they have to be at the ignominy of untouchability and walk long distances to fetch water, since the drinking water wells in the village from where Dalit women can draw water are far away from where they live. And it is mostly girls who are burdened with the task of filling water for the entire household also. Consequently, the education of these girls also get affected. This is cited as one of the major reasons for the high level of school dropouts among Dalit girls in districts where water scarcity is acute. Not only this, but the scarcity of water, not only this, but the scarcity of water for drinking leads to lack of proper sanitation and hygiene, which subsequently leads to water and foodborne disease as well. So, yeah, Dalit women and girls are really very vulnerable to this climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Achal and Priyanka. That gave us a lot to think about because, from what I've noticed in the aftermath of a natural disaster, there's not much being talked about what is its effect on women, especially Dalit women, because as Priyanka pointed out, they're already, they're already being, they're sort of sexual violence against them is much more than upper caste women. So what happens in the aftermath of a natural disasters are said to induce circumstances where women are more at risk of sexual violence. So leading on from that, I would like to ask, are there any policy measures in place to ensure safety of and access to basic resources for Dalit women in the aftermath of a natural disaster? uh, Achal can go and then Priyanka can go.
Yes, to address and ensure the safety and access to resources for Dalit women during various disasters, the government of Nepal has developed many policies, plans, and have identified different priority projects, have introduced different acts, and also have allocated budget for adapting both short and long-term impact of climate change. But when it comes to implementation, it always lags. I don't know. It is the case in Nepal only or other country, but yeah, when it comes to implementation of whatever plans and policies, it always lags. There are many different policies prepared by national climate change policy. There is a national climate change policy which has stated to recognize women as a vulnerable group, prioritizes participation of women in implementation of climate programs, and there is another national adaptation program of action, which has also mentioned gender as a cross-cutting theme. Many such, as I said, many such policies has been made, but it is only limited in book. It is not implemented. It is not acted properly as per mentioned. So yeah, that's the main reason that those women are getting more vulnerable toward it. Thank you.
Thank you, Achal, for letting us know because this is really interesting to know about these policies. Priyanka, could you tell us more?
I couldn't agree more with Achal. It's the same in India.
Yeah.
Although there may be certain blanket measures for marginalized communities, they do exist. But the reality is quite the opposite, really. One would assume that basic human rights, such as the right to adequate housing, because, natural disasters completely sort of displace communities, right? So one would really assume that the right to adequate housing, along with basic rights such as security, access to food, something as basic as food, clean water, basic sanitation, basic health services, that you one would imagine that these rights are protected during natural disasters. But when we actually go to relief camps, we see stark inequalities on the lines of caste and gender even there. I think the most brutal and inhumane discriminatory practices are witnessed during these disasters, right? Dalits are discriminated in relief camps, and during even distribution of relief measures such as like basic food packets and basic drinking water facilities. Even for basic needs like water and food in these camps, they are under the whims and fancies of distributors who often are from dominant castes. They're in the mercy of the authorities who don't care about the poor and marginalized, especially Dalit women. And when we're talking about Dalit women, we also need to factor in children, right? We also need to factor in pregnant Dalit women, the disabled. So what happens? So there are no provisions for the marginalized in this sense. And you also see that if Dalits sort of resent and they sort of question authorities distributing these relief measures, they are faced with backlash, sometimes physical attacks. Most often, Dalit women are sort of sexually assaulted in these relief camps. So, in 2019, we had a series of sort of floods across Kerala, West Bengal, Odisha, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu and Karnataka. And we saw all of these basic human rights being violated, from the distribution of food packets and water to, many cases being reported of sexual violence against Dalit community, against Dalit women. So even it was really, I was really surprised that in one of the relief camps, Dalit women were sort of standing in a separate queue near the closest bow well to fetch water till the non-Dalits finish fetching water. Imagine in a relief camp. So whatever happens in the villages is sort of reflected even in these relief camps during natural disasters or whatever you say. So Dalits are sort of completely disentitled, and their rights and their access to basic rights are sort of, are not provided by the authorities. So Dalits are not provided food and water for several days, and then you sort of see that women are further marginalized in these relief camps. And also another point that I would like to add is, when we analyze trends during forced evictions and demolitions in cities, you see how the authorities also neglect, Dalit communities accessing these basic entitlements. In most cases, the residents of urban slums are mostly Dalit families. They, Dalits and Muslims, sort of live in these ghettos, and they also include, poor, pregnant women, children, the elderly, sick, the disabled, and they don't have any access to these basic civic amenities, which is really appalling. So yeah, so this is the situation even when natural disasters strike.
Thank you, Priyanka, and thank you, Achal. So, leading on from here, talking about access to basic resources, do you think like menstrual equity is, sort of related to climate justice in terms of access, sanitation, hygiene, and sustainability of products? Priyanka, maybe you can go, and then Achal can go.
Absolutely. I think, we Dalit women, we sort of menstruate as we cook, as we farm, as we're, you know, how, what do I say, as we educate, as we organize, as we agitate, as we lead protests, as we build resilience. But however, the most and the worst and most inhumane forms of discrimination and untouchability is seen when it comes to access to water, hygiene, and sanitation. For instance, most of the violence starts for the very cause as Dalits trying to access the public pump or hand pumps, right? There are numerous case studies on violence against Dalit women accessing water. The deprivation of a human right, such as water, hygiene, and sanitation, is a constant reminder of the inherent indignity of India's caste system, right? Imagine women and young girls, they walk, they sort of bear the burden of household work, and they are also the first point of violence. They sort of face discrimination every on an everyday basis, just trying to access something as simple as water. Young girls drop out from their families, drop out from schools, because they're sort of assigned the job to go and fetch water for the households. So they sort of face several, there are several instances where they face verbal and physical abuse by dominant caste, and they will be under the constant threat while collecting water from public taps and wells. Sometimes dominant caste women don't allow Dalit women to touch the public source of water, and they sort of pour water to the pots of Dalit women. This is something that we even see in the ghettos and in the urban slums in cities. And I'm talking about cities like the capital of India, like even in Delhi, even in the NCR region, you will see these sort of things. You'll see Dalit women and young girls sort of standing in a separate queue, and these queues are never ending queues, and they're sort of, trying to just sort of fetch one pot of water. So, again, how much water they will take back home depends on the whims and fancies of the dominant caste women in that queue, right? So access to water directly affects the health of women and children. Lack of access to drinking water and good sanitation facilities lead to poor health. Thereby, it also causes a lot of dropout, right? Children drop out of school because they're constantly sick. And so when you look at it, Dalit women and Dalit girls spend half their calorie intake just sort of fetching water. And also data shows that in India, more than about 20% of Dalits do not have access to safe drinking water. Like about 48-49% of Dalit villages are denied access to a single water source. I'm not even talking about taps in their own houses. So, and only about 10 Dalit households have access to sanitation, as compared to about 27 to 30% of non-Dalit households. So, and regarding sanitation, also only about 24% of Dalit households have access to latrine facilities, as compared to about 60% of general households which have latrines in their houses. So, when we look at the situation of Dalit women, they face multiple forms of marginalization just with regard to their access to, basic amenities like this and natural resources. In rural India, access to an imperative resource like water, like sanitation, shows the differential patterns across regions, where poverty, physical separation of hamlets, you will always see that the Dalit hamlets are, at in the corner and very far from the, dominant caste village or their hamlets. So, these ideas of purity and pollution, and they have no access to government welfare programs. Hardly, 10% of Dalits have access to these services. So yes, there's a lot of gap in between, in what policies state and the lived realities of Dalit women, and especially with access to basic services like water, sanitation, and hygiene. Over to Achal.
Okay, thank you so much, Priyanka. This word menstrual equity reminded me of the situation of Dalit girls and women in Nepal during menstruation, which is very miserable. Here in Nepal, menstruating women during their period get banished from their homes and are forced to sleep in a basic shelter hut known as chowgut, and are barred from touching food, religious icons, cattle, and men also, since they are considered impure. This tradition has hit every woman, but Dalit women and girls are very vulnerable to it since they are ignorant to almost every factor, be it education, shelter, health, sanitation, and more. Last year, I want to say one case. Last year in July, a 15-year-old girl, a Dalit girl, was found dead in a seed in Otham district of Nepal. She was a ninth grader student. The police officer investigating the case said that girl died of suffocation caused by smoke. She had made the fire in the cell to keep herself warm. But why had she been banished from her family's house and forced to sleep out of the coal shield is a question. Her family was forcing her to observe an incident custom known as Thaupadi. See, this is the case here in Nepal. Even though the Supreme Court of Nepal issued a directive against the tradition in 2005, due to lack of legislation, Thaupadi was never criminalized, ultimately leading to the death of many innocent Dalit girls who lacks the affordability and access to menstrual hygiene and are also ignorant to reproductive health, sexual health, and sex education. Therefore, if proper education is not given to them in this matter, they won't understand that their choices of menstrual products, the way they access, use, and dispose of them can ultimately hamper the empowerment. So, yeah, I believe for climate justice, menstrual equity is very important factor of consideration in Nepal, not only with respect to access, hygiene, sanitation, but to life. Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Agreed. Um, Thank you for your insights because I've always been interested in areas of menstrual education, and this really made me think a lot. So, moving on, you both of you have given us some examples of issues faced by Dalit women related to climate change, but are there any examples which we can pit against each in the sense that issues faced by Dalit women in villages versus the ones faced by Dalit women in cities. So, Priyanka, could you tell us
Yeah.
something?
Yeah. So, in on the whole, I think Dalit women have huge problems in accessing key productive resources as well as land. For Dalit women, our problems start because we have no access to land, right? So, in India, you'll see Dalit women facing serious challenges in carrying out their multiple productive and reproductive roles within their families and communities, in part due to lack of rural infrastructure and lack of access to essential services and goods. So this is something that you'll see across, rural and in the cities. So they have the highest, I'm talking about Dalit women, they have the highest poverty levels, they're landless, they're dependent on the dominant caste for employment. There's so much of violence when they sort of ask for an increase in their wages, when they are farmers who don't have land, but even if they have very small fragmented pieces of land. So they don't have any access to loan, so their access to resources or even their efforts to access them are met by violence, right, by dominant caste. So, due to the intersection of caste, class, and gender, Dalit women are subjected to direct and structural violence. If you see specifically, the structural violence and lack of access to resources perpetuate their poverty and undermine their dignity in every way. This is from sort of sowing to tilling to everything across the spectrum of activities. You will see this, and they're most often met by violence from the landlord when they try to assert their rights or, their access to wages, like I said. So, Dalit women, especially the rural women, they have very limited access and control over the land, which in turn leads to food insecurity. So, if they don't have food to eat, then that sort of impacts their children, and, all of then it becomes like this cycle of the vicious cycle of poverty, like we say. And when it comes to infrastructure and resources in Dalit community, you will see the government often overlooks those areas and does not allocate the necessary funds to ensure equality of access to resources. Clearly the Dalit community is cut off from these resources, and the government needs to sort of plug in these gaps, because most often you will see Dalit women have no awareness about how to go about these processes. They have no access to justice. So unless the government sort of comes and brings about these measures to facilitate and promote their rights, it's not going to happen out of the blue. And you'll see that while Dalit women are legally permitted to own land, securing property is so difficult. Like I said earlier, only 13% of women own land, and we don't even have a disaggregated data on how many Dalit rural women own land. And most probably it would be almost zilch, because they don't have access. They are bonded laborers on these lands, and they bonded, it's like generational bonded labor. It's not that if I am a bonded labor, so will my daughter. So it's like, how do we break out of this sort of systemic discrimination? So I think, and in cities, what happens is, of course, most Dalit women live in the urban slums, in these ghettos. They have no access to essential services like this, like I said, even basic civic amenities such as access to drinking water, access to the PDS system, the public distribution system. Even in cities, you will see them sort of, because they don't have access to latrines, or these public toilets that the government provides is in such an inaccessible sort of in terms of infrastructure, it's so bad that they don't even have spaces for open defecation. So that sort of has an impact on their health as well. And so one of the many unnecessary, I would say, the unnecessary hardships of a Dalit woman's life is being denied access to these services. And if you look at their access to maternal health services, even in cities, There was a study conducted by Navsurjan Trust, and the findings show that only 46% of Dalit women sort of received any sort of antenatal or postnatal visits. So on a regular basis, where are these women? We just spoke about menstrual hygiene. They have no awareness whatsoever, and then they sort of get married off really early, so they have no idea about antenatal care or postnatal care. So, a lack of awareness generally about their own health, their own well being, and a lack of access to basic services, I think, sort of puts them in a very, very vulnerable situation. And the last point I would like to make is both rural and urban women have no access to political participation. I think Dalit women are politically marginalized on the whole, but rural Dalit women, despite the quota system, in India, there is a quota system in place where, due to the Panchayati Raj 73rd Amendment, even if you see the Dalit women who sort of get elected, it would be the male counterparts, most likely the husband who is sort of, ruling the roost. Dalit women don't even get a chair to sit. She would be the panchayat of the panchayat leader, but in her own office she won't have a chair to sit. So discrimination against Dalit women is very systemic, and it happens at every level. So when you have no access to basic resources, then all the adverse effects of climate are sort of bared by them. So over to Achal.
Yeah, I agree with Priyanka. So, adding my point on it, climate change is actually problematic to every human being, but its impact seem more critical on Dalit women. So, as to talk about the problem faced by Dalit women due to climate change, there is actually sector-wise impact on climate change they face. Though I can say that Dalit women from village areas are more impacted in comparison with Dalit women from cities. So in village, most of the Dalit women are engaged in agriculture sector. So the risk of climate induced disaster like floods, drought, erratic rainfalls, and disease outbreak is there. But they also face the problem of crops failure leading to production losses, food insecurities. Likewise, most of them depend on natural sources of water for their livelihood and drinking purpose as well. So, decrease in water availability can definitely hamper their lives as they have to spend more time in fetching water. And well, not only this, but it hampers to their proper sanitation and hygiene, which subsequently lead to water and foodborne diseases. Similarly, as to talk about the problem faced by Dalit women in city areas, mm, is I guess it's the changing climatic pattern which are leading the livelihood of not only Dalit women but others also in more frequent drought, drying spring, and decrease in the groundwater table during the dry season. And yes, the poor in Nepal, the poor urban planning and inadequate provision of infrastructure such as drainage system have also made the flood a major problem in urban areas. So yes, that's all I want to add.
Thank you, Achal and Priyanka. So, leading on from here, have there been any success stories or positive impact of Dalit women finding solutions which are aimed at mitigation or adaptation to the climate crisis? Achal, could you share with us, and then Priyanka, we would love to.
Okay, thank you for the question. Actually, to mitigate climate change, there is no specific success story. But yes, actually, FEDER works in ensuring provision and access to better service and opportunity for Dalit women by creating livelihood opportunity for them, which isn't just limited for short term but for long run. So FEDER has influenced many Dalit women of different districts for finding sustainable solution to adapt the sustainable goal. I want to share one story of Raju Devi Bike. She says, life, I'll read it out. She says, life is all about sun and shadow. It all depends on us whether we opt to shine like the sun or fade like a shadow. This is Raju Devi Bika, who has witnessed several peaks and plains in her life. Being married off just at the age of 15, she couldn't complete her studies. With no academic qualification and no skills in hand, she was confined to be a homemaker with no earning of her own. Her life took major setback when her husband, the only earning member of the family, lost his life due to snake bite, leaving Raju and her four children in a devastating situation. Raju recalls the news of the demise of her husband was so shocking to her that it took 2 months for her to gain complete consciousness. The real challenge of her life begins after the demise of her husband. She faced domestic violence from her own mother-in-law, in-laws, I can say, in-laws, and yeah, being a widow, she began to be treated as an impure. But she was a strong lady who always wanted to do something on her own as to support and bring up her children in a good manner. Even though to get involved in income generating activity was a far-fetched reality for her, she joined a Dalit women group organized by FEDO in Badaiyatal rural municipality. And no longer that she had joined that group, she began to participate in each and every activities conducted by the group. And yeah, within this very short span of time, she became the most active member of the group, being involved in several activities conducted by the group. Gave her confidence that she can start up her business. And yeah, in this connection, she took loan of rupees 10,000 from the group and bought two goats and started goat farming on her own. And within 14 months, he managed to double the number of goats by selling the goats in a local market. She's earning, yes, now she is earning good enough. So yeah, she is earning good enough to provide her and her children a better life. Mm, so yeah, that sort of work Fero does to uplift Dalit women from different parts of the countries, which ultimately help their life and also helps in community. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing the story with us.
Yeah.
Priyanka?
Yeah, I think resilience, that's just one word that we can take away from Atul's story, case study. So, I will talk about Punjab because, there's so much right now happening in India with the farmers' protests and all of that. So, and we have a lot to learn. Dalit women's stories don't come up in the mainstream media, but there's a lot happening. In Punjab, there are like 32% of the population are Dalits, and Dalit women are sort of fighting for their right to cultivate land, and they're surely winning. So, in this small district called Sangrur, Dalit women from 115 families in this village, they sort of fought for their right to cultivate land. And this land was sort of usurped by upper caste men. So basically, in Punjab, it's important to understand the local context there. So in Punjab, local revenue authorities hold land auctions biannually, and these auctions are divided along the caste lines for people who belong to the general category and those who belong to the scheduled caste. Dalits are formally called scheduled caste. So, but however, since 1950s, the Jat farmers have sort of abused these laws to acquire land by placing proxy Dalit candidates in local auctions in order to sort of maintain, the Jat dominance over these lands. But Dalit women from the Sangrur district of Punjab sort of came together to form a movement that boycotted these rigged land auctions and reinstated the implementation of land laws in the state. So this sort of social transformation is setting a precedent for Punjabi Dalit farmers fighting for their dignity in a sort of very complex, highly casteist setup. So these women members of this land movement, of course, face a lot of backlash, and they get sort of, they have gotten beaten up, their families jailed, and sort of just to silence them. Really, a lot of violence sort of took place in the district, but they sort of persevered. The women persevered in their efforts to implement the law protecting their rights. So farming is sort of often related to procuring water or fodder for their animals, but even these everyday activities are sort of struck with violence. So despite this everyday sort of violence, these women are continuing their fight, and now they're sowing and tilling, and they're also sort of reaping the benefits of it in the market. So that's one example in Punjab. Another thing is in Tamil Nadu, for hundreds of years, Dalits were sort of prohibited from owning property, and today the majority of them don't have land even till date. And data says that 86% of Dalit farmers are landless laborers. So to lease property, hundreds of landless women across the state depend on local NGOs to sort of, and there is a Jesuit NGO sort of helping them negotiate for land, as well as offer training in farming techniques. Because like I said earlier, awareness, they really have no access to awareness and capacity building programs, because they just don't have any access to, whether it be financial resources or technical resources. So now this group of Dalit women farmers are sort of really fighting caste and patriarchy, taking it head on in a very inhospitable environment, given the sort of they're on this Kaveri Delta belt in Tamil Nadu, and it doesn't get too much rains, and it's a very sort of a drought prone area. Despite that, they're sort of pooling resources, cultivating sizable acres of land and growing vegetables, and sort of splitting the labor between this Dalit women's collective. So I think, of course, solidarity networks among Dalit women farmers, because they share a shared experience of humiliation, especially from the upper caste, be it the Vanyars in Tamil Nadu or be it the Jats in Punjab, because of their shared experience of violence and humiliation. So they have this very strong solidarity amongst them, and they sort of, with their limited resources, they're sort of, pulling all the resources that they have together to till their lands and to make very marginal profits. But this is not just an act of sort of farming and getting an income out of this activity, but it's also really taking caste and patriarchy head on. So I think there are very inspiring stories. They're few in the mainstream media, but they're definitely there on the ground. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing these stories. They're really inspiring. So, speaking about Dalit women farmers, so going on to my next questions, what do you think is the role of Dalit women in agriculture and food security? Priyanka, you could answer, and then maybe Achal can go ahead.
From Anshul's story and just me going through these case studies, I think farmers, especially women farmers, we really have to salute their groundbreaking model of strength and resilience. Because despite all the muscle, the money power, the sort of violence that's meted on them on a daily basis, they still sort of step out with that much more resilience, and they're here to create a more equal and sustainable future for everyone. Because it's just not about them, and it's just not about the farm, it's also about the ecology. It's also about sustainable ways of farming, because most of these women are bonded laborers, and it's also generational, right? So even their great grandmother would have been a bonded laborer on the land. So they have this very intricate and very personal connection with the land they sow, and with with the entire ecosystem that comes along with it. And in India today, there's so much happening against the regressive farm laws. And when we look at it, if they're not repealed, they're going to definitely push farmers, especially Dalit farmers, and within that, Dalit women into landlessness and poverty. So I think Dalit women play a very critical role in farming, and also sort of holding that entire ecosystem, whether it's the future of our food, whether it's, you name it, whether it's cattle, whether it's just just about the ecology. I think they hold that entire piece together. So I think they play a very, very critical role. Over to Achal, and then I could add maybe.
Okay, thank you, Priyanka. Well, in developing countries like Nepal, Dalit women plays a significant role in agriculture since most of them are engaged in food production and selling food products at market. Yeah, in Nepal, it's been reported that up to 98% of women are employed in agriculture sector, a percent which is higher than that of men. Contribution by Dalit women is therefore critical in agriculture agriculture to achieve global food security. However, they generally don't have the same access to land, water, seed, training, and credit. As a consequence, in Nepal, Dalit women involvement is greater in minor and subsequent food production for crops such as millet, maize, while others are involved in cash crops and commercial production of crops such as rice. So yeah, many studies have shown that improving the status of Dalit women by giving them access to resources increases agricultural productivity and therefore income. When Dalit women have increased income, they tend to spend a greater fraction of their finances on their children, health, and nutrition. So yeah, if given with more enhanced knowledge and idea on agriculture stuffs like rain, water harvesting, drip irrigation, early warning system, flood control techniques, then Dalit women could actually contribute to productive farming. So yeah, that might be the role of Dalit women in farming future of our world.
Thank you, Achal and Priyanka. Do you want to add something, or I can go?
Yeah, the only thing I want to just say is that, it's very clear that Dalit women are marginalized and engage in highly exploitative working conditions. So, in the Indian context, I would say that, we really need to sort of amplify the farmers' voices, the ones who are protesting today, because the Farm Bills 2020 will make them more vulnerable and push them. Now they're at the margins, but this will just push them off the margins. So, I think it's critical that we need to ensure Dalit women's access to land rights, because this will smash the foundations of both caste and patriarchy. Like I said, that caste violence and land is so connected, and both from mine and Archer's examples, I think it's really come through. So I think that's the only thing I wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Priyanka. Taking from your point about amplifying the voices of Dalit women farmers, I'll go to my last and probably the most important question. How can the climate justice movement be made more inclusive of Dalit women? Um, Priyanka, you can go ahead, and then maybe Achal, you can tell us. This
You
is
know,
something I'm really looking forward to this answer.
Yeah, see, when we talk about inclusion, the first thing, no matter whether it's climate or anything else, I would say give Dalit women a seat at the table. We need to redesign how decision-making tables look, whether it's at the policy level, whether it's, in negotiations with, bilateral and multilateral decision-making platforms like the G20, because G20 is talking a lot about climate, or whether it's within our own movements, like even within Fridays for Futures. I would say that we need to ensure that, young Dalit women, not only young, but just Dalit women who have experienced all of these impacts of the environment and a lot of other things are included in your movement. So I think the most critical thing is redesigning how decision making tables look across the spectrum. Diverse representation of women farmers, especially from historically marginalized communities who continue to fight and resist all kinds of oppression, and we're not talking just of oppression that happens once in a lifetime. We're talking about systemic oppression, targeted violence. They really need to be given a seat at every table that is possible. And I think special attention and recognition needs to be given to women farmers on the whole. And within that, the government of India needs to have special measures targeted towards women farmers, and within that, specifically looking at farmers from marginalized communities, especially Dalit and Adivasi women farmers. And I think also women farmers just sort of I'm sorry, I said that. So access, and also along with recognizing them, access to training, access to land and natural productive resources, credit is a really critical piece, because these women come from such poor backgrounds that they have absolutely no access to credit. I think the government can help a great deal in facilitating that. And also capacity building programs, development programs, and how to form cooperative structures to increase their participation in sustainable development. I think that's also a really critical piece. And also we need to factor in health, because environmental risk on women's health hasn't been given priority in any of the policies, or around climate, or any of the agricultural policies. And we're just going from bad to worse. So it's just it's really, really appalling. So I think and also when we talk about health, we need to also look at the polluting industrial facilities that are sort of very conveniently placed in rural areas, and the sort of impact that has on women's health. And yeah, I think this is what's coming to my mind as of now. I can add to Achal after Achal finishes.
So yeah, to make climate justice movement more inclusive for Dalit women, firstly, I think we need to make Dalit women know about this matter. Climate change, global warming, all these terms are very new to many Dalit women, as they aren't aware of any of it. Okay? So educating them is really very important, I think. Yeah. Moving on, it is very important to conduct awareness raising programs and trainings to ensure their access to information on gender equity, climate risk, and locally appropriate adaptation measures. Since Dalit women and girls in Nepal doesn't have proper knowledge and understanding on climate change impact and the adaptation practices. Likewise, uh, in Nepal, I think there is lack of six disaggregated data of climate vulnerabilities and risk, resulting in poor understanding of gender differentiated risk of climate change and climate-induced disasters. So, yeah, proper study and research should be carried out by the concerned authorities for bringing this matter into serious consideration. And also there should be conscious, this point is very important one, because yeah, there should be a conscious effort to increase representation of Dalit women in climate leadership and decision making. Hence the equal engagement of Dalit women in local adaptation planning, its implementation and monitoring should be ensured. Likewise, there should be livelihood diversification and alternative livelihood promotion, like introducing new agricultural practices and technologies to those women and girls. Similarly, I think the government and other concerned authorities should emphasize more on training the marginalized one on disaster preparedness, waste management, river conservation, organic farming, and many other similar topics. And also, moving to my last point, Dalit women and girls have minimum access to water for drinking, sanitation, and irrigation. Their livelihood depends on agriculture, wages earning, ecosystem services, and rain-fed agriculture. Dalit women live in fragile dwelling and have weak social support networks, hence are more likely to be affected by climate change. So, to address this situation, adaptation and resilient building requires integrated and holistic management of natural, human, cultural, physical, and financial capitals. Yeah, that's all I want to tell.
Thank you. Thank you, Priyanka and Achal, for educating us and probably making us more sensitive about these issues, because I feel like otherwise we wouldn't have seen these things from your perspective, which is very important. Um, so the floor is open for questions. Yeah, go ahead, Priyanka.
I just want to add one very critical point. I think we need to integrate gender concerns and perspectives in policies, in climate policies and policies in general, from an intersectional lens. Going back to what I said, women are really not a homogeneous group, so we cannot have blanket policies for women. So women farmers are not a homogeneous group either. So I think it's very important to bring in the lens of intersectionality while developing policies. And even we as the civil society, I think that we need to be very, very conscious. We have to make a very conscious move to sort of integrate women from marginalized communities, especially Dalit women, into our movements. We need to we need to be allies, and we need to amplify their struggles, and also sort of center stage their demands. So yes, over to you now. Thank you.
Thank you, Priyanka. So I was just saying, I think the floor is open to questions. I think uh, Beena ma'am is asking something. So yeah, please go ahead.
Yes. Hi, thanks. This is Beena from the National Campaign on Dalit Human Rights. Congratulations to both Priyanka and Achal. They've brought in some really critical points regarding women and climate change, Dalit women and climate change. But my question is mostly to Priyanka. We know that a lot of our women do not own land, which is very clearly brought out by Priyanka. Many of our women are laborers on farmlands, and many times when whether it be the policy matters taken up by government, when they're giving compensation for lost land, they don't take into consideration that these women would have also lost their livelihood, or whether it be also other policies where land reform, where they don't take into consideration that of these women who are actually laborers. So my question is the larger question of how do we start having these conversations where, one, of course, being able to give land, but we know that that is a demand that has been by the community for many years now,
Yes,
but it
yes.
is also a very difficult demand for many governments, both state as well as national government. So what would be our strategy in ensuring that women who are also laborers on other farms or other fields are counted, are part of these conversations?
Thank you, Veena. I would say that, in these 60 to 70 years, the Dalit women's movement and the larger Dalit movement has also raised these issues. They're absolutely critical. They have been raised for decades now, but nothing much has been done. So from our perspective, I think the only thing that we could do is educate, agitate, and organize. I think we need to really sort of bring in joint forces, come together and raise the issues of Dalit women. Even if you look at the agitations today, there are 12 million farmers at the border, but we never get to hear about the Dalit farmers, leave alone the Dalit women farmers. But they are surely there. There are Dalit farmers at the border borders, in the Delhi, Haryana, Delhi, Rajasthan, Delhi, Punjab borders, but we don't hear about them. So I think we as the Dalit movement really need to throw up the issue of livelihood, about agriculture. And I don't think there's a more pivotal time in history than for us to raise the issues of Dalit women farmers, their landlessness, and the vicious circle of poverty. I think that we really need to join forces and, reach out to these women. Like Achal said, that awareness is a very critical piece. They don't even, because they've been bonded laborers for decades, and it has been generational in so many ways. They don't even know about their rights, about their entitlements. The government does provide a few entitlements, but they have no access to it. So I think that like Baba Sahib said, in every situation that we face today, and in the days to come, educate, agitate, and organize would be the key takeaway. Thank you. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but yeah.
Thank you, Priyanka, for answering.
Thanks, Priyanka.
So Mr. Ashish has his hand raised, so please go ahead.
Yes, thanks. Thanks, Priyanka and Achal. I think that was a fantastic conversation. And thanks to Fridays for Future for organizing it, because for many decades, I think this conversation between Dalit rights and environmental rights has not happened, or not happened adequately. So it's wonderful to see that. In the chat, I put up something which kind of related to what Priyanka was talking about, the struggle for land rights, where about the example of the Deccan Development Society in Telangana, 4,000 Dalit women farmers fighting for land rights, but also fighting to sustain and recreate their sustainable, organic, local, seed-based agricultural systems and move towards food sovereignty. And it's been an amazing journey in the last 30 years that I've had the great privilege of following. But one of the issues that gets raised in that is the conventional Dalit argument, which takes partly from what Ambedkar ji said, of moving away from villages and moving into cities, because villages are and will remain areas of, the way he sort of characterized it, which is of course partly true. It seems that what Priyanka you're arguing and what, say, the DDS women are arguing in Telangana is that no, we have to transform the situation in the village itself, even as we do it in the city. So in both location, both urban and rural situations, we have to transform the situation towards castelessness and dignity and sustainability and all of that, rather than this conventional thing that everybody should be moving to cities where somehow automatically caste discrimination will be much less. We even have arguments like the Dalit Chamber of Commerce saying that capitalism is good because that's the only system in which Dalits can be anonymous. And as we know, that is simply not true. So does the new sort of the Dalit youth, people like you, kind of see things differently from that conventional argument? Thanks.
Vimalji also has her hand raised.
Priyanka and Payal,
Achal.
very excellent suggestions you have given, and you have bring the gender, caste, and class, the sectionality between these, and how Dalit women are neglected by the state, by the government. When the policy implementation, and you are right, Priyanka, that since last 30 years, more than 30 years, your Ruth Manorama and myself and all the Dalit women leader, the older Dalit women leader, fighting for to, oh God, what happened? We are asking asking for five acre land for Dalit women, so they can cultivate themselves and they can empower, get the empowerment. But this demand is not accepted by any government. Only Madhya Pradesh government, when Congress was leading the state, they tried to distribute land, which is the Panchami land, to the Dalit and Adivasi families, so that there was a tremendous opposition from the land holding communities and especially the Savarna people. And so this has not happened. Even the government was willing to distribute the Panchami land among the Dalit families. So this is unless the political will is there, even the political will is there, the caste system and the gender biases will not allow the Dalit women to hold the 5 acre or 2 acre, even 2 acre land for on their name. So this is the situation, and unless the caste system eradicate, as Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar says, unless the caste system eradicated, nothing will be changed. What you and Achal have narrated, the same situation in India and Nepal and Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. The same situation is there. Wherever the caste system is alive or in practice, the same system is there. And Dalit women are pushed behind since long. So this is a very crucial point you have discussed in this webinar. And thank you very much. I'm very happy to see the young generation is discussing this very important and very crucial point, very crucial discussion you had. Thank you, Achal and Priyanka and Srijani Datta. You are really taking ahead the the torch of Dalit women's movement ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vimalji. But unfortunately, I don't think that we are saying anything different from what you have been saying. Maybe you started 30 years back. I don't think, even as we speak about intersectionality today, you have been talking about intersectionality for 30 years. And
No.
suddenly it's just become very fashionable in the last 2 years to talk
Yeah,
about the
yeah.
intersectional impact on marginalized women. I think all of you have been saying the same thing. But having said that, I think that, we just have to keep on the good fight and fight with more resilience. Given the current political context, things are getting very, very difficult for marginalized communities, especially if you're a woman. But yes, what do we do? We just have to move ahead and
We have to
you know,
fight.
yes,
Fight.
yes.
You have to keep fighting against the all the odd situation. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Jai Bhim to you.
Jai
Jai Bhim and a
Bhim, Jai
big
Bhim.
salam to all of you.
Yes, big salam.
Yes.
Jai
And
Bhim.
just a
Bhim,
quick,
Anchal, Jai
sorry,
Bhim.
sorry. No, sorry, Achal, please come in. Please come in.
No, no, that's fine. You can carry on. I can add on later.
No, no, please go ahead. I just wanted to respond to Ashish G's question, but please go ahead, Achal. Please.
So yeah, whatever Bimal ma'am shared was so like I feel really bad. I don't know why, but I feel really bad because the situation before 30 years back was also the same as now. I don't think any changes. The things for which we are fighting for, where is the outcome? I can't see any change. So yeah, I think we should motivate every youth to work on it. We should get together and
Yes.
work on it and fight against it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's all I wanted to tell.
And
Thank
also, I
you.
think as Dalit women, we don't have the privilege to lose
Yeah,
hope.
yeah, we
We
don't
have
have.
to
Yeah,
Yeah, we don't have that
Very
privilege,
good.
you know.
Yes.
I think we have to still sort of, strengthen our forces and just keep moving ahead and becoming more resilient, um, by every day. And you look at the Dalit women at the grassroots, the sort of resilience and the strength that they have, just really fighting caste and patriarchy head on every day, fighting tooth and nail within their families, within their communities, with the government and the local authorities. I think we have a lot to learn from, our indigenous and women at the grassroots. Yes.
All right. Thank you, Vimal ma'am. And does anyone have any other question?
Just to respond to Ashish ji's
Yeah, good.
comment, just to say that, we're really learning from all of you stalwarts, and you put on 30 to 40 years of work, and, you really know much more than any of us here. But just to
I think Priyanka got disconnected. We can wait
Oh,
for her.
sorry. Oh, sorry.
Go back. Good.
Oh, sorry. It says my internet is unstable. I'm sorry. I was just, I don't know what you last heard, because I kept continuing to talk.
No, you can start from the start that, you were just beginning to speak. Good.
Okay, okay. So, just to respond to Ashish ji's question, like I said, land alienation is the root of caste violence, right? So, caste and land politics and the politics over water and resources is so intricate to the entire caste politics. So, one cannot be done in isolation with the other. It has to be, if the women today, the Dalit women today are taking caste and patriarchy head on, that's the only way that it can be done. It can't be done in isolation. Just because migration happens from rural to urban, I don't think that any of us escape caste system. Caste is very much prevalent even in urban spaces, and I think, um, it may not be in such visible ways, but it's very, very apparent in our sort of access to, work, in our access to everything, access to essential services, access to everything. So I think that, unless we talk about caste and how to sort of annihilate caste, there's just no way that we can, sort of achieve any sort of justice. And we are talking about substantial justice and redistributive justice. So that cannot be done, without sort of addressing the root cause of the problem, which is definitely, undoubtedly, the caste system. So, yes, Ashish ji.
Thank you.
Thank you, Priyanka. Um, does anyone have any last comments or questions? You can unmute yourself or type it out in the chat box. Priyanka and Achal, if you have any last comments, you can do that, then we can end this wonderful webinar.
Can I maybe just a quick additional thought is that I think from Priyanka, from what you said, and what a lot of the Dalit movements, the new Dalit movements, the youth Dalit movements are saying, it's probably also time that we broke down the ideological barriers that have separated us for far too long. We've looked at each other as Ambedkarites or Gandhians or Marxists or feminists or environmentalists or whatever. And if we're all fighting for basically for justice and equality and no discrimination, and of course also ecological sustainability, we need to go beyond those. It's a lot of, I think, a lot of academic kind of ideological divides that we've been divided up into way too long for way too long, and I think it's people like you who will be able to lead the way to saying justice is justice, and if it means being with Adivasis and their ideology, Gandhians and their ideology, Ambedkarites and their ideology, etc. And even with there might be differences, but there are some such fundamental commonalities that we have to be able to fight together if we want to change the macro system, which is so powerful. So I'm hoping very much that youth like you will be able to get away from these polarizations that have divided us in the past.
I completely agree with you, Ashiji, but I also look at all these stratifications being very casteist in nature, because no matter where we go, I think we Indians, caste sort of runs in our veins, and we're so quick to sort of stratify and say you're an Ambedkarite, I'm a Gandhian, and Gandhians have the higher pegging order than the Ambedkarites. So I think that the root of that is also casteism in so many ways. So I think that we Dalit feminists, the younger ones and the older ones, I think our fight is to reject all these binaries and say that no, we're sick and tired of these binaries because they're so casteist in nature. So it's great if allies like you sort of help strengthen our voices and amplify them, but it would have to be a collective struggle. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining. Especially thanking the speakers for taking out the time to educate us.